You came and introduced the film, and you said that you didn't have any idea at that point what you were making. This was another job at that stage. I mean, how about for you two, Paul and Barrie? I mean,
one thing I was thinking about it the other night. What I remember, suddenly thought maybe something special. Bob came in every day for scenes he wasn't in.
okay,
There was a kind of real good family feeling, and he thought he couldn't stay away from it.
okay,
That was a kind of good omen.
yeah, absolutely. Paul, how about you? I mean, was this just another actor's job, or did you know there was something special going on?
I was actually on stage at the time doing a play, one of Barry's plays called Sus, and then Barrie rang me up one day and said, like, oh, they're actually a film in progress, so just turn up and go and see John Mackenzie. And that was it. So I came in halfway through the filming, basically.
So, and you hadn't seen, I mean, you saw the script
No,
the day before?
no.
You hadn't seen the script at all?
No.
I think he was rather thrown when John Mackenzie said, "You show us your bum first."
Exactly,
And then he
Still
got
got
it.
the scars,
And now it's gone down in history. I mean, I suppose, Barrie, I'm going to come to you first because, I guess the story of The Long Good Friday starts with you, in a literal sense, it's your story, and also obviously this was your idea to start with. So tell us a little bit about how that journey began.
How it began, I'd worked with Barry Hanson, the producer, on a couple of television things, and he got into a job where he had the money to make a film. And we had a lunch one day, and what film should we do? And I was talking around it, and I always liked Humphrey Bogart films, and we said it would be the film we'd like to see tonight. And I remember thinking, Humphrey Bogart, if he was a Cockney, it was a part for Humphrey Bogart, not Bob Hoskins.
Okay.
And where that came from, I think, with the drama, the crime drama, the film noir, but also the humour.
Sure.
That was always important.
I mean, one of the things that people often talk about with The Long Good Friday is how far-sighted it ended up being, and it talked a lot about things which then unfolded in London, and it almost seemed, sort of like a kind of an oracle. Where did that come from? I mean, because sometimes I think it almost feels like people think that was just a lucky break, and that just happened by accident. But I mean, you had that background in East London, didn't you?
No, I'd worked in local paper in East London, the Stratford Express, a weekly paper, and there was smells of things, and my feeling was what was going on. A lot of money was changing hands in town halls. I'm sure that the whole thing about redevelopment, apparently, the most important thing is to get the permission, the permission to build, planning permission, and that was a kind of key to it. And also there was I come from East London, East End, and there was such a sadness of the docks closing. I remember kind of older uncles and that, they thought it was a kind of genocide of East London was happening, and also there was going to be enormous change coming, but hadn't foreseen how enormous. You've just seen it, but the model of when he looks at the model of how it's going to look, Docklands, it should have looked like Manhattan, but I don't think anyone would have believed it at that time,
Where did Harold come from?
There's only one Bob Hoskins.
Sure.
Sorry, saying his name there, I cannot believe I'm never going to see him again. He was such a force for life, such fabulous guy, such fun. And where did he come from? Well, as a reporter on the local paper, it was the time at the end of the Craze Empire, and never kind of got involved, but I used to sit around and listen to that kind of dialogue in those pubs, and it was a kind of, I think it was a combination of people I knew from a distance, didn't know incredibly well, and then mixing it, if like the ideal there was a Humphrey Bogart was going to play this part. It's a kind of fusion of lots of different things coming together. And once I started writing the dialogue, then it took over. I could hear Bob's voice, I think, and then it took over. That big scene just at the end when he pulls out the Yanks and Mafia, I shit 'em. That was one of the first things I wrote. That speech. I just knew that was going to be a key thing in it, and that's where the character kind of developed.
So you were writing for Bob.
Actually, no, it wasn't exactly writing for Bob, but it's kind of weird. But I was thinking that's the kind of actor we want.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, it's a film filled with just incredibly quotable lines, and I mean, as soon as you mention the film to people, Hooters comes out. It's always my favourite. You know. Is there one line that you're proudest of? Because it's a script chock full of them.
Actually, but give Bob his credits. Do miss Bob so much. I remember one line I wrote was when we're taking to keep it all incognito, we're taking the body out in an ice cream van, and I'd written a lot of dignity in that, going out like a choc ice. And Bob changed it to raspberry ripple,
right,
which made it a fabulous.
That's
line.
a moment of poetry, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the sheer poetry of it. Yeah.
I suppose one of the happy accidents there is the reference to the Olympics as well. I mean, at that stage, had you heard any sort of whispers that was even something on the horizon?
I'm old now. My sort of our uncles used to talk about 45, 46, the Olympics in London after the war. And they said it's got to come again and we'll do it proper this time. I think it was just that kind of thing. Okay. No, I hadn't heard anything about it was coming, okay. No. Okay. And one regret I've put 1988. I wish I'd said in 20 years' time that'd be the Olympics instead of giving a date to it.
I think the world can forgive you for that one. Phil, I mean, coming to you, I mean, when you took this job on, I mean, again, you mentioned in the intro, it's just another job as a cinematographer. But I suppose maybe the unique challenge was London, you know, and was this location. So how did you set about, what was your London going to be?
Well, I knew John very well, and that's how the job came about. I'd done several films with him at BBC Television. And I thought he was a great director. He was a great friend of mine, and we got on so well. I didn't know much about that Docklands area. I mean, I knew it was there, but that was the first time I'd actually shot a film that was set in that area. And that was fascinating to me, to see all this vast area of cranes and buildings and water and everything that was completely unpopulated. And it just seemed like it was crying out to be a film location, and so it became. I mean, we had to rent that boat. There was a whole to-do about renting that boat, but the guy wanted a lot of money, and we didn't want to pay him. So
it's just because one of the things that comes through in the film actually is the sheer size of the docks. I mean, it wasn't, you know, people sometimes think of St Catherine Docks and they think that was the docks, but actually you've got that whole stretch whopping down into Millwall, the Isle of Dogs. I mean, yeah. You get a sense of that. So presumably that was something you were quite keen to put across, was just the sheer expanse of this.
Yeah, it was the idea that all of this was completely open and there was nobody there. I mean, that was what was interesting, I think, and how we could make most use of it in the storyline that we were telling. I mean, I think we only featured, someone came up with the name of the dock just now. Did you tell me the name of the dock?
Royal Albert.
Was it?
Royal Albert, yeah.
Royal Albert dock, yeah.
That's where there's a conversation
I think
about
that was mostly where it was set, but there were other areas which we didn't go into. But
and you were shooting all around London as well. I mean, that's the other thing I think.
Again, he was a Londoner, you know, so it was obviously.
And it feels like a film that was made, you know, by Londoners who actually knew the city. But did that present any particular challenges? Because I mean, nothing on there is a set. I mean, you're shooting on the streets, and again, to the scene Paul's scene there. Yeah. That's Villa Road in Brixton. I mean, that's a house. So I mean, did that present particular challenges?
The challenges were that everything was so small. But then I'd grown up doing that with BBC Television. You didn't have huge sets, you know. And the thing about that boat was, if you remember the scenes in it, you could never really put a lamp in the boat. So everything you had to do had to come from outside the boat. And that became a bit of an issue. And therefore you're at the mercy of the weather. You know, whatever the daylight was doing, how much daylight there was coming in, all the rest of it. I had lamps on the dock side, but I had nothing on the water side. So that was an issue. The flat where he consoles Helen, where he's supposed to live, is actually in Richmond. It's not actually in London at all. And that was pretty small too. So one was always constrained by these small areas. And John, I mean, the way John works is he doesn't like what he calls flashy cam work. He likes to keep it fairly straightforward. It's about the drama, it's about the faces, it's about the eyes. And that's how John works. So in a sense, that made it slightly easier. If you'd wanted to do Steadicam shots, well, there wasn't a Steadicam then, but if you want to go all over the place with the Steadicam, that would have been an issue, I think.
I mean, at the same time, there's a couple of very audacious moments in that film, and I wanted to mention one of them, which is the meat hook scene, which everyone always remembers. Yes. I mean, so tell me a little bit about shooting that, because even now, last time I watched the film, you know, quite recently again, I mean, and I've seen The Long Good Friday so many times, and that scene, it's still just visually, I mean, it just takes your head off, you know.
Yeah, well, it was a real abattoir, what can I tell you? It was pretty scary to shoot in because of the fact that it was a real place where they were killing animals. And we got it at a certain time during the night. I think the whole thing had to happen during the night. And it was a perfect choice. I don't know if Barrie had chosen that or had written that, but I mean, I thought it was a perfect place.
I was going to ask Barrie, I mean, how much of the shoot were you around for? Because sometimes with writers, I mean, they're kept very much at arm's length. At other times, writers are going to be involved. I mean, were you there for most of the filming?
No, I wasn't there for much of the filming. I was on call always.
Okay.
My work was all before it and around if something wasn't working to change it then. Actually, on the boat thing, the interesting thing, we filmed it in the summer. And of course, anyone that had a boat in London was away. And we finally found someone that had that boat. And it was, I think it was almost unseaworthy, wasn't it?
Yes.
Pretty much. But the guy, he was not wanting to thought film, you've got to have lots and lots of money. And I remember John and Barry Hanson, the producer, got me to con him and say, wait a minute, just a second. So can you just you've got a really good profile. Have you ever thought of that? Hang on, take a couple of stills of it. And I had to write a little scene, and they gave him a screen test, and that's how we got the boats.
Perfect. Ingenuity, thinking on your feet. That's how it works. It's the glorious filmmakers.
Talking of sets, actually, the interior of that boat is a set.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. Okay.
Built on top of the actual boat.
I suppose because the reality would be so tight that it would be
Yeah.
difficult to work.
Well, we didn't like the interior. I think that was more to the point.
I mean, Paul, we spoke a moment ago about the Errol scene, and you sort of came up to getting the role and to arriving on set. But then tell us a little bit about filming that scene, because it's another one of those scenes that everybody remembers. No one forgets that scene.
Well, it was the first time I'd met Bob and P.H. Mariatti. And to do that scene was the most frightening scene in my life. And really, I really was frightened. I actually thought Barrie had set me up for a snuff movie, you know what I mean? Oh, God, what's going on? I was cacking myself, I really was, that scene, and so that's how, I was actually doing a stage play as well for Barrie called Sus, which was all about a suspect being picked up on sus for killing his wife and stuff like that, and that was quite horrendous. So my mind was really sort of like.
But I think I worried you slightly, didn't I?
It did, yeah.
I told you it was a snuff movie.
Exactly.
And you've got Bob Hoskins and P.H. Mariatti with their machete.
Yeah.
Did you have a chance to rehearse that much? Because it feels like when you watch that scene now, it doesn't feel like a scene. That's one of the things that gives it that edge, I think. It doesn't feel like a scene where you've blocked it all and everyone knows exactly what they're doing. It feels like you can see it in your eyes.
That's right, yeah.
I think it's just about.
I think we did it in one take, or that's not being braggy about it, but I think it was about 1 or 2 takes.
I think,
John
it's difficult to say.
really
I can't remember exactly, but I know the business with the blood coming out of the knife was difficult to achieve.
Sure.
So we didn't want to keep doing it too many times. So.
I mean, one person we haven't talked about that much, I guess, and we'll talk about both John and Bob, but I wanted to talk a little bit about John Mackenzie. And I mean, what was special about him on set as a director, do you think?
Who?
John Mackenzie.
John Mackenzie?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think he's a great director. I think he's an unappreciated director. The problem with John, in my opinion, was he never understood what Hollywood was about. He was only interested in what he was doing and the emotion of what he was doing. So he never understood stars or anything like that. He just took whoever was right for the part and whoever told the story. I think he was one of the best directors I've ever worked with. There was a lot of no-nonsense with him. He didn't like flashy camera work. He didn't say, let's crane up, let's track in, let's steady cam, whatever. It was fairly controlled what John wanted. But the way he handled actors, I think, was brilliant. I mean, in fact, the scene with Paul, I mean, is riveting, I think.
And how about for you, Paul, working with him?
It was great, that's what I'm saying, and that's the first time I'd met John as well. As I say, Barrie rang me up and said, oh, by the way, there's a film in progress, so go along and see John. And then when I did go to see John, John said to me, like, go and wait in the bar on the corner. So I did.
I suppose because one of the things he does is like he captures that tone so well, because obviously the script is filled with some very, very funny stuff, yet at the same time it never tips over into comedy. It always feels very, very natural. I mean, that must have been strange seeing that come to life, Barrie, because obviously, I mean, most of your work, or a lot of your work until that point, had been on the stage. So I'm wondering about seeing the film take shape, how that was for you as an experience.
Get often asked, theatre work mainly, why do you write plays, why do you do this, why do you do that? Actually, the whole thing about dramatic writing, I think, is to write wonderful parts for actors to play. And that's the thing. I like actors and like see where they go with this.
Sure.
Yeah? Well, I was really pleased with everyone in this, yeah. Actually, the whole thing about it, Longer Friday, was it was such a happy time, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was,
Not for me, it wasn't.
Leaving Paul aside, I mean, you know.
Well, happy is always, I mean, it's an awkward adjective in a sense, because it's, you know, you are working very hard to get it right. So, but when it keeps coming right, it's pleasing.
Well,
it
how
looks
hard?
like everyone's on top of their game at
Yes,
that time,
sure.
isn't it? And I think also the other thing you can't work out, yeah, that's the director one, that's the guy to film it, and they're the actors. But then it's the luck and chance that the chemistry works.
Sure.
And I
Yes.
think luck was very much on our side.
Yeah.
Then, yeah.
Yeah.
But it feels like the product of something which is quite tight-knit. And I mean, you know, certainly, I mean, because you, I mean, beforehand, I mean, certainly you and Bob and John Mackenzie, I mean, you sort of socialised with each other as well, didn't you? And you, I mean, you weren't, there wasn't just the film and then you went home at the end of the night.
No, sure, this is true. Yeah. Yes, yeah, been thrown out a lot of places with those two guys. Yes.
Good. I'm not going to pry.
I used to get embarrassed by there was an explosive the meetings in restaurants very often, and as I'm quite quiet, and as the voice as I started shouting, I would go to the toilet, get away from it. And people, I always remember one restaurant, the language was ferocious. You may recall. And I remember, I think it was Michael Horden entertaining his niece at a nearby table, and suddenly asked the waiters to move the table.
Right.
And it was like this. I used to go to the toilet, and they came back sometimes, and no one was there. I said, where are the people I was with? They said, I threw them out.
See, that's a claim to fame.
Huh?
That's a claim to fame.
Yes.
I mean, how hard a shoot was it? Because I mean, obviously at that stage, I mean, it was a fairly tight schedule, I'd imagine, and a fairly low budget. You know, and you got a lot done with.
That was commonly noticed. I have to. May I just briefly mention the camera operator, Mike Proudfoot, who was in the audience. Michael, stand up, Michael. He's not going to. Or is he gone?
He walked out when you sat down.
He walked out when I sat down. But he was in the audience earlier. But, you know, it was a good, first-rate first AC, focus puller, you know, who's the most underrated job in the business today, in my opinion. Most of you don't even know what they do. And they make this whole thing go very well. And, yeah, no, it was smooth, I think. But there's always, you know, there's always discussion, there's always dichotomy, there's always, shall we do this or shall we do that? But I mean, that's the nature of filmmaking. But in a sense, it was relatively trouble-free, I suppose, in that sense.
It's interesting you say trouble-free, because then obviously there was a period after the film was wrapped.
That's when all the trouble started.
Yeah, and then between then and it actually coming out. I mean, tell us a little bit about what was going on with the film then, because that wasn't smooth sailing, was it?
My memory of that was when the people that put up the money, they'd never read the script, of course, and then they saw the film and were horrified. They said, this is IRA propaganda. We can't show this in our cinemas. The IRA will blow them up. I remember saying, well, if it's IRA propaganda, why are they going to blow up your cinemas? They said, don't get intellectual with me. Which I took as a compliment, poorly expressed. No, and then the battle began.
Right.
They wanted to cut it, to put it as a TV film, which was taking about 20 minutes out of it, and all mention of the IRA, because it's unpatriotic, and also the violence, because it's bad for children to see it.
Right. Were you aiming it at children at that point?
I was aiming it at the executives.
Of course.
But so actually, Barry Hanson and I, it was going to be cut. We found out where it was going to be cut. We got someone to let us in. We took the reels of film and took it up to Edinburgh. It was before the Edinburgh Film Festival, but they were showing films. We got a screening there. A few journalists had been tipped off. They reviewed it, and I remember the Times, actually. It was a huge review. It was an open letter to Lou Grade, because at the time he'd just spent, this was less than $1 million, and he'd just spent 40 million on Raise the Titanic. Right. The joke going round was, for 40 million it'd been cheaper to lower the Atlantic. And he was kind of horrified. But I remember the Times thing was an open letter to Lou Grade, this is the best thing you've ever done. So I think he sacked a couple of executives and took the credit for it. No, that's unfair, and it wasn't him, it was others there that... don't forget, it sounds funny saying it now, but it was a time of a lot of IRA activity in London, so there was a real fear.
Sure. Sure.
But fortunately, it didn't get cut. I can't imagine what it'd been like on television without mentioning the IRA and without
Exactly,
any violence.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what would be left.
83
for
minutes
it.
was the
It's just
proposed
wallpaper,
length.
isn't it?
Right, interesting. Yeah. Lots of Helen Mirren reclining on the bed, I suppose. That's great. There was also going to be, and it may even exist. I remember from being mentioned earlier, the American cut, which was dubbed. Is that right? I mean, when did you know
There was
about
talk
this?
of revoicing Bob because they didn't understand what he was saying.
In America, but
In
they were
America.
voicing him with a Birmingham actor.
Yeah, exactly. Wolverhampton, actually.
So, and this has actually happened. So it's like Long Good Friday meets Slade. That's basically what it ends up with. I mean, it's terrifying thought this actually happened, and this is
Well,
out there
I mean,
somewhere.
would the Americans have ever noticed? I don't know. But I mean, they wouldn't have got the full value of the movie with somebody else speaking the lines. That's for sure.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about the restoration, Phil, because I mean, the restoration, I don't know about anyone else, but I mean, I was pretty blown away, actually. I mean, lots of things get digitally restored, and you think, well, it looks nice, but I can't tell that much difference. It looks like, not a different movie, but it looks like a kind of,
Well, I hope it doesn't look like a different movie.
it doesn't look like a different movie, but it looks like a kind of, it's the movie at its best. I mean, how was it going back and revisiting it now? And I mean, how much of a challenge was it to get it to the standard that people have just
I
seen?
think the challenge. First of all, let me compliment Stephen Bierman of Deluxe, who was the colorist. And James White, who set the whole thing up, and they'd done a lot of it before I got there. They'd done sort of the majority of it, the levelling out, I think you call it, you guys. But then I came into, and I probably stuck my nose in a bit more than I should have done. I used up every hour there was, I think, because you suddenly see things that could be better. You know, that the story can be told better if I can just tweak that a bit, and I can just tweak. I mean, what I remember most is that scene where Bob's at the back of the boat, the Tower Bridge is behind him, and he's saying, "Oh, I'm a Londoner," and all that dialogue. And as we shot it, you know, and it's a difficult scene for Bob to do because it's 4 or 5 minutes long, and we're going down the Thames with guard boats on the front and the back and everything else, and it just got blacker and blacker and blacker, the actual real weather, and his face started to come brighter than the background, which I hate. But what do you do when you make the photographic version? Is you have to keep his face that you can see it. So it was great for me to be able to window that face out and then deal with that background as the shot progressed. So there were things that, you know, the digital ways of grading can help you. And also little corners of frames, you can pick up little bits and pieces. And
Yeah, because that scene, you actually see the storm clouds. I remember Barry talking about the fact it was very nice weather for a lot of the time you were shooting. And in that scene,
it was rotten weather.
You can see them.
Typical Britain. I mean, it's absolutely rotten weather at that moment.
That was the day of the fast stick race, wasn't it? With about 4 boats sank.
Yes,
That day.
yeah. And so you're able to fix stuff like that. And
Sure. Well, I mean, I think it looks staggering. I mean, it looks so impressive.
Oh, good.
But I wanted to ask, before we sort of hand over to the audience, I did want to ask a little bit more about Bob. You know, and obviously it's a screening tinged with sadness. You know, but it's an obvious question. There's an obvious answer. Can you imagine anyone else in that role, or was this the role that Bob was? I suppose essentially it's a cliche, but in this case maybe it's true. This was the role that he was meant to play.
I think Bob made every role he played. It was only he could do it.
Sure.
I was too biased to love Bob so much. But I remember when he went to America to do the Roger Rabbit thing, he came round afterwards and he said, "What you got to realise, Barry, is now I'm in a different stratosphere."
And he was.
With Bob, don't forget he's a very sensitive man, wonderful actor, and very, very respectful. Wonderful way he helped people the first films and so all that stuff. But he did change. If he walked into a room, the room did change. He had that kind of stuff. And actually, this is one story. I do remember when the film was going to be cut and slaughtered, castrated. There was a meeting with Barry Hansen, John Mackenzie, me and Bob, and the office was in Carnaby Street.
Yes, it was,
at that time, and it was just before Christmas. And there was a Salvation Army band playing carols outside. We're in the upstairs room in this office. You know, in the winter after December, it starts to get dark, and you don't realise you're sitting in the dark. And Bob had 2 poodles for his lady, Patty Love, a Christmas present, and also a bottle of vodka. And we heard it was going to be cut, and he then said, wait a minute, 4 of us here. I know a geezer for 50 grand, having wiped out. Barry sobered very quickly and said, well, wait a minute, Bob. I mean, you wipe out Lou Grade, it's a big family, another one to pop up. All right, 50 grand each.